Hi, it is Cameron here. I found this section of the class to be quite challenging, but it was extremely interesting to see all of the different kind of theories that exist that try to explain market behavior. I know we started off talking about the different kinds of business cycle theories like Keynesian or monetarist or real business cycle theory or the Austrian business cycle theory. And it was interesting to see how those later tie in to the different kind of exchange rate systems a country will implement. It was also interesting to see how this decision affects the effectiveness of monetary versus fiscal policy, and it kind of determines which one should be used depending upon the kind of structure a country originally tries to implement. It all kind of comes back into play when you start to talk about the floating versus fixed exchange rate systems. I thought that was very interesting because if a country chooses to act, more conservatively and it likes a monetarist theory and it likes to not have so much government intervention, then that will play a large role into what kind of exchange rate system that country will implement. You can also go on the other end too. If a country chooses to implement a more liberal or lenient sort of economic structure, this could also affect, the kind of exchange rate system it chooses and the kind of currency valuation model the country adheres to, depending on the kind of business cycle theory a country, really promotes and how involved it is when there are negative economic shocks. It ultimately determines the kind of exchange rate system that a country will implement. Economics is a very variable area of study, so it really depends on the country and what kind of exchange rate system that they would implement. But I think that's a decent example that what kind of involvement you see within your floating and or fixed exchange rate system. So I found that was very interesting, and it helped illuminate to me how a lot of the decisions that are made regarding how a country is going to conduct itself, they all intertwine with one another. I'm going to be taking international economics next semester, so this portion of the class really excited me because I'm excited to learn more about how these decisions within the government rear their head in terms of how countries will interact with one another, how they exchange with one another, and how sometimes these exchanges can turn into conflicts. I'm really interested to learn more about that. And additionally, I'm interested to learn more about how there are various countries that choose to implement different kinds of business cycle theories. I'm also very interested to learn more about how different countries have determined what kind of overall economic structure is going to be held in the country, whether it's communist, socialist, or a free market, and etc. And from that, how they've determined, whether are they going to act um, more actively in a negative economic shock? Are they going to allow the country to kind of correct itself in terms of its economy, and just how different countries have come to their present day market structure? I really liked that this portion of the class used real life examples to explain some of the theories that we've discussed and the models that we've discussed, and it really got my wheels turning. One thing that really interests me in this part of the class is how conflicts generally, when they transpire between countries, often a big contributor of these conflicts are the different kind of economic models that exist within each of the countries and the different kind of exchange rates that exist for each of the countries. And I think one good example is how we'll often see a lot of conflicts that occur with oil. And I think that can often transpire because countries have different valuation models for their currency and for the exchange rate. And if one country is choosing to do, a floating exchange rate in terms of how they're going to price oil and how they're going to price imports and exports, it can in turn affect that of a country that uses a fixed exchange rate. Same can happen on the other hand, if a country is using like a fixed exchange rate, it can affect that country, that's using a floating exchange rate. And I think this is a good, physical example of how countries can get into conflicts over these differences and have disagreements with one another. So that was a really interesting takeaway I learned from this model. And I'm really excited to learn more about how countries, how they interact with each other and how the interactions can be different upon the different kind of models each country tries to follow. I also liked this discussion about Hayek's lecture and some of the things that he was saying, and how there is not one sole way to run an economy. So I found that really interesting, and it intrigues me to learn more about the different structures, the economy in different countries, because I feel like as an American, I'm a little bit inherently ignorant to the inner workings of different countries and to how decisions and how economic policies are made in other countries. I'm definitely going to be doing some more research into certain economic shocks, that we dealt with recessions, and how other countries view those kind of models, and how implementation of those models has worked for those countries, and how that has affected their trade and their ability to respond to economic shocks. Another really interesting thing that I will definitely be doing some more research on is into how COVID affected those kind of model implementations and currency valuation and exchange rate system models, and how countries are dealing with that now. And on top of that, I would love to see how countries are now interacting with each other in response to the large economic shocks we saw from COVID that occurred, across the world. Really love that this section of the class. It gave me a nice foundation and understanding of how some international policies work and how certain countries choose to implement certain economic structures. And it lays a great foundation for me to begin asking questions and to do my own individual research about, real life applications and why things are the way that they are today. I definitely have a greater interest in international economics and into trade and defense after learning these models. I'm supposed to be taking an international economics course next semester, so I love that this portion of the class, it laid me a nice framework and foundation to go into this class and already have a lot of questions, already have my wheels turning, and already be ready to dive deep into the material and learn more about some of the topics we went over in this portion of the class.